Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now what we have here is a graphics card that you couldn't buy when it first got released unless you purchased a pre-built gaming PC from HP, for example. Because of that, these are still pretty difficult to find, but on the occasion that they do pop up on second-hand selling sites, they aren't too expensive. I paid £70 here in the UK. So what is the card in question? Well, it's an AMD Radeon RX 5500, not a 5500 XT, which is widely available second-hand and still more expensive, but a standard OEM 5500. Available as part of pre-assembled PCs first appearing in late 2019, the RX 5500 was a taste of what was to come with the XT version, and ultimately that ended up being pretty much the same thing. The XT was available in 4 or 8GB models however, whereas the non-XT here just has 4 gigs. I mentioned its exclusivity to pre-builts at the start, but I don't think it was used much outside of HP and Lenovo desktops. There's also a 5500M for laptops, however, which launched around the same time as its elusive desktop counterpart. With 4GB of GDDR6, it's a tough sell in 2023, but for the right price, it may still be worth it for all you 1080p gamers out there, as it is still supported by drivers at the time of this video, and at the time of its very limited launch, it traded blows with the likes of the GTX 1060, 1650 Super, and RX 580. How good is it today though? Well, let's talk about that. First up, and it was a little bit of a disaster for two of the newest titles tested today. The first was Hogwarts Legacy, which just crashed every time I tried to play it, no matter the settings. The next was Jedi Survivor, which didn't even get as far as the main menu, it just froze every time, even after deleting in-game config files and reinstalling different driver versions. But don't let that put you off. Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077, which is one of the more demanding games tested today that did work. I went with 1080p resolution for every game. Today though in some cases FSR was also used, like here. I thought medium was pushing it a bit but stuck with it anyway, and the medium textures with the medium preset plus high crowd density and FSR quality returned a pretty solid average with some decent percentile lows. No, 4GB of VRAM in 2023 isn't ideal, but it is still usable if you manage your expectations. That said, I'd rather get a 6GB 1060 instead for slightly more peace of mind if the price is similar. Apex Legends is up next, and this is the sort of game that a card like this is still perfect for. It will run the game at the highest settings with at least 60 FPS, but I think keeping the textures at high and lowering everything else makes more sense, because we don't lose much visually but we gain a lot performance wise, and that's very important for online multiplayer games. TSAA was also enabled to take care of those jagged edges. Overall 142 FPS was the average with solid percentile lows. Fortnite will also run with high settings, but again lowering them for a higher frame rate makes more sense, especially as fancy lumen lighting effects were out of the question anyway. Medium is best for the OEM 5500 here in my opinion, as we were averaging over 120 frames per second. The percentile lows were good as well, though if you do want more performance from this card, then the low preset would be the way to go. I think we're sitting in a nice sweet spot here, however. Red Dead Redemption 2 is next, and here I went with the Xbox One X equivalent settings as detailed by Digital Foundry. The only difference is that we aren't running at 2160p of course. That said, I was still very surprised by the performance from this card in pairing with my trusty but soon to be upgraded i5 12400F system. That's right, I'll be upgrading my CPU before the end of the year, though I haven't decided what to yet. Back on subject, and the 5500 is doing well here, averaging 75 FPS, even in and around towns and cities. It's holding up very nicely. You can probably expect near identical performance from the 5500 XT, though the 8GB version of that card will be better and potentially worth the higher price. Forza Horizon 5 gave us a low memory warning at the high preset, but I persevered nonetheless, and actually performance overall was good, even during multi-competitor races. Medium settings will mean that we can avoid this warning, but honestly, I'd still play it high, as that's more than doable with the OEM 5500, as you can see from the decent averages and percentile figures on screen. Grand Theft Auto 5 is older but always worth including due to its continuing popularity, and of course it runs with the highest settings bar MSAA and the advanced graphical options. Not too much to talk about here, and we could definitely bump the resolution up if we wanted to 1440p, though as with all games, 1920 by 1080 would be my recommendation. This is definitely a 1080p graphics card in 2023. Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, just like Cyberpunk, also required a little bit of help from FSR at the medium preset, but I thought I'd stick with this instead of low, as it does look a bit better and FSR quality on my 1080p display doesn't have much of an impact on overall image quality, at least not from where I'm sitting, but it's all about personal preference. We actually saw over 60 FPS, but there were a few dips and drops which I'm sure can be attributed to the VRAM, or lack thereof. The Witcher 3 Next Gen looks great at high and runs well too. TAAU and HBAO Plus were also enabled. There were a couple of drops below 60, particularly in and around towns and cities, but overall the game held up very well and played great. The OEM 5500 non-XT, for the price I paid, is doing alright, but prices do differ from region to region, and I'd very much recommend seeing what else you can get for similar money, especially as this will be harder to find. 1060s and 580s come to mind. They're still solid, lower cost 1080p cards. Finally, it's the turn of Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer. This is one of the more demanding maps from my experience, and here with the balanced preset, we were seeing 75 frames per second. It was a pretty good experience all round and definitely playable, though again, you could opt for even lower settings for a higher frame rate. Now overall, the 5500 non-XT OEM is still fine, but 4 gigs of VRAM may make it less desirable than the 6GB 1060 and 8GB 580, which can be found for not much more money, at least here in the UK. Not to mention that they are much more common, and I've never experienced crashes in Hogwarts Legacy or Jedi Survivor with those two. Still, it's always interesting to test these quirky and lesser known GPUs, and I hope you found it interesting to watch and helpful if you're in the market for a cheap second-hand graphics card. This is also an ideal card for those who haven't got much space inside a system, and I particularly like the way that the PCIe connector is at the end rather than on the top. It reminds me a little bit of the old R9 Nano GPUs, which is probably due a revisit in 2023 as well. All that's left to say now is thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of this card down below. Let me know if you use a pre-built, likely an HP pre-built with this card in it, in the comments of course. Leave a like on this one if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.